just fly right out of the blue. There's no way I can't deny the magic of you. Oh, sleight of hand, yes, that could be true. It's not for me to understand the magic of you. Do what you do, that's the magic of you.
Good morning, everybody. Wow, got an applause on that. Excellent. We are starting a series of messages throughout the month of October called Family Matters, and some of you know that that was the name of a sitcom in the early 90s, and so we're kind of doing a sitcom theme, little living room setup here. Now, some of you heard that we were going to be doing something on Family Matters, and someone asked me if I was going to dress up like Steve Urkel, or if I already was on a regular basis dressing up like Steve Urkel. I like to think of myself as Steve Urkel's alter ego, Stefan Urkel. For those of you who are familiar with the show, you know what I'm talking about. We are kind of talking about these different issues because family matters, right? Family is important. And here at Cornerstone, we believe that families are very, very, very important. So we're going to take 5 weeks to focus on all sorts of different issues of the family. Now, here's the thing. A lot of times when churches, in particular, or when people in general talk about families, we kind of talk about the typical family, right? Mom, dad, 2.5 kids, and a dog or a pet, right? There's this idea of a certain kind of nuclear family or what it looks like. Throughout this series, we're going to attempt to talk to everybody in the room. And not everybody in the room has a family like that. Some of you, maybe you never got married. Maybe some of you in the room are divorced. Maybe you never had kids. Maybe you want to have kids and you still have not been able to. And so we're going to take a whole week to talk about singleness. Now, that's not a week where those of you who are married can just like not check out or not show up, because the message that the scriptures say about single people, I think, applies in many ways to all of us. We're going to talk about divorce. We're going to talk about blended families. The reality of our world is that family matters tend to get messy, right? And I'm grateful that the Bible is not separate from that. The Bible talks about all of these different kinds of issues. And so throughout this series, can I just encourage you to be here? I want to encourage you to make this a priority. Invite your friends. Invite family members. Invite people that you think could benefit from this. I think this will be a really helpful, practical series, and I think we're going to have some fun along the way as well. Now, because we've called this Family Matters and we're kind of doing a spin off of sitcoms, what we're going to try to do is we're going to play off this idea and we're going to talk about a specific sitcom each week as it relates to our topic. And so today we're going to start by remembering one of the most popular sitcoms of the late 80s, and it was a show called Who's the Boss? Okay, remember that? Look at that hair. Come on. The big hair, bigger the better, lots of hairspray. This was a show that starred Tony Danza and Judith Light. Now, you got to wonder who comes up with the scripts or the ideas for these shows. But Tony Danza was a retired Major League Baseball player who became a housekeeper. I don't know where they thought that was a good idea, but he was the housekeeper. He would stay at home, and Judith's character, she was a divorced advertising executive. So she was like the breadwinner, and Tony stayed home. And the title of the show, Who's the Boss? It played off this clear role reversal that was taking place. Because, the idea was that the man was in charge, especially Tony Danza, strong, Italian, stereotypes there. And it was this reversal where instead the female was in charge and she was the boss. And of course, there was all sorts of tension about whether or not they liked each other and if they were going to date and all those kinds of things as well. My family watched the show growing up. But they did a lot to break down these stereotypes. So here's where we're going to land today. So today, our text is found in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And in Deuteronomy chapter 6, there are no real questions posed there, but in the passage that we heard read a few minutes ago, we find a couple of questions. And those questions are very similar to the question of this show, who's the boss? So let's start by taking a look at verses 4 through 6. It says this: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts." So there is an implied question in here, and this is a question that applies to every single person in the room. It doesn't matter if you have a family or not. It doesn't matter if you're married or not or have kids or not. This is our starting point. This is universal for all of us here. Because before we can talk about the family, we need to talk about each of us as individuals first. And the first question is this: who is your Lord? Or to use the kind of terminology of the show, who is the boss of your life? Church, a healthy family starts with your own individual relationship with God. And there's a couple questions we have to ask of ourselves. Are we going to say, "Thy will be done" to God? Or are we going to say, "My will be done"? We have to make a distinction. Who's going to be the boss of our life? God, thy will be done, you be my boss. Or my will be done, I'm going to be the boss. Or I'm going to make something else. I'm going to choose another boss of my life. And if we're going to have healthy families, it starts with healthy individuals, our own relationship with God. Parents, do you want to have a healthy relationship with your kids? Of course you do. Children, do you want to have a healthy relationship with your parents or with your siblings? Of course, we want to have these healthy relationships, but that starts with us having a healthy relationship with God when we put Him in the proper place, when we make Him Lord of our life and we make Him the boss over us. Now, I'm not saying that if you make God your boss, that all of your relationships are going to be easy. It's not going to be rosy all the time, but that is where we start. We start by having a healthy relationship with God. So, the verses that we saw on the screen a minute ago, we'll go back to them in a second, but there are two kind of instructions here. It tells us that we need to know God and love God. Very simple. If we're going to make God our boss, if He's going to be the Lord of our life, it starts by knowing God and loving God. And if I can give you some what I think is very practical advice for your relationships, before you even start dealing with the relationships you have with others, you have to start here with knowing God and loving God. Look, I'm not a professional counselor, okay? I don't have a degree in counseling, but I do a lot of pastoral counseling. I have a lot of conversations with people, and I can just tell you time and time and time and time again, as I'm having these conversations, if the people that I'm talking to with their problems and their situations and their tension and their relationship, if they would just know God a little more, and if they would love God a little more, so many of the issues that they face interpersonally that are conflict and tension, so many of those things would go away or at least be minimized if they would just know God and love God more. So very practically, we need to start with us. And our text tells us how to do that. It says, know God. It says we need to know who He is. It says, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The text is very clear to tell us who He is. We need to know that He is one. And when you try to serve any other master apart from or in addition to God, you're going to fail every single time. Jesus talks about this in Matthew 6. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will love the one and hate the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. And then he gives us an example. He says, you cannot serve both God and money. And one of the things that I see with families so often, individuals in families, part of the problem that they have is they are trying to serve another master than God or multiple masters in addition to God. And every time I see that, there's conflict and there's tension and there's turmoil. To use Jesus' example here, people serve money and they try to make it a god. They make it a lord or a master over their life. They sacrifice everything in order to pursue financial gain. They work long hours. They neglect their family. Why? So they can get something that doesn't last, so they can buy other stuff that doesn't last with it. And the irony is, their family, the thing that's most enduring in their life, they leave to the side and they ignore. When you are serving anything in place of the Lord our God who is one, you're shortchanging yourself, your family, and everyone around you. So knowing God isn't just knowing who he is, that he's one, but it also means knowing what he says and does, and what he expects of us. That's why the passage continues and says that these commands are to be on your hearts. Now, when we think of hearts in our modern language, we think of emotion, right? We think of feelings. But in the ancient world, their understanding of the heart was that was where your intellect was. That's where your mind was. So what he's saying is he's saying, dwell intellectually on these commandments. Know God's commandments. Understand them. Live them out. You know, I love our culture, and I love technology, right? I love that I can pick up my phone, and I can say, hey, Siri, and maybe it just went off. There we go, sorry. I can do that. No, but I can, and I can ask a question. What's the temperature today? And like that, I get an answer. You know, search this up on the internet and give me an answer. And I can get answers, like at the drop of a hat. But you know, the problem with that is that can make us very lazy, especially when it comes to our faith. Because we assume that Siri is going to take care of us, right? We assume that someone else is going to have the answers for us. But church, if we are going to know God and love God, if we're going to know God, we need to take the time to know him, to not just assume that someone else is going to have the answers for us. We need to spend time reading the Bible on a regular, daily basis. We need to take time in prayer, in worship, in memorizing his word. Look, church, you will get out of your relationship with God what you put into it. And I love what we do here. On Sunday mornings, we gather together to celebrate what God's doing in our lives, and it's really important. It's important that we're here. But an hour and a half is not enough. You need to know God, and the way you do that is, yes, in part by coming to church, but it's also through spending time in God's word on a regular basis. And this doesn't come easy for us, which is why we have the second instruction. So how do we make God our boss? By knowing him, but then also by loving him. We are to love him with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our strength. So it's an intellectual pursuit to know God, but it's also something that happens because of our passion. You know, quite honestly, I think there's a lot of Christians who love the things of this earth more than they love the things of God. And that is just sad. It's devastating to me. There are some people, I think, some Christians who spend more energy and passion loving the wrong things than loving the right things and what God has done for them. You know, serving God should not be tedious. It should be something that we enjoy and we're passionate about. Some of you, or many of you, know that I work out at a local gym in Cottage Hills. It's called Shinobi Fitness, and we do obstacle training there, like the stuff from American Ninja Warrior. And I've been doing it for about a year or over a year now. And about a couple months ago, I went to the owner of the gym because my son goes to class before that. And Kent's in there, and I said, you know, Tim, I'm here. Do you mind if I help? I mean, I go to the class after his, and I'm just sitting here on the side. Do you mind if I can go ahead and help with class? And that's kind of led now to me helping teach a couple of different classes. I just like, hey, I'm here. I'll help. I'll do whatever I want. Look, the owner, Tim, he did not have to twist my arms, you know, to get me to do that. Why? I love that place. I want to be there. I want other kids to grow in their abilities. I want to help them out. It was just something that I'm passionate about, and I wanted to be able to help them out, to help him out with. And that's the way I think our relationship with God should be. God doesn't want our obligation. He wants our adoration. You know, Tim didn't oblige me to go help. Hey, you've been coming here now. You got to put in, right? You better help. He didn't say that. I just desired to help him. And church, there is joy in serving the Lord. Our God is good and he is great. While we were sinners, while we were at our worst point, Christ died for us. I mean, how incredible is that? Jesus came to live the life we couldn't live. He died the death that we deserved so we could experience the love and forgiveness we didn't earn. I mean, we give Jesus our all in our service to him. but Jesus gave his all to us. And I was thinking about this week. If you think about my all, right? If you're going to put that on a scale, and you're going to think about Jesus's all, and we put that on a scale, and I give him my all, and he gives me his all, I get the better end of that deal. That is a joy. This is a joy to serve God. I love God. It's not an obligation for me to worship him. He saved me, and I don't deserve it most of the time, right? And I'm sure if you're honest, it's not that different for you as well. Church, this is a joy for us to serve him. So ask yourself this first question. You want to have a healthy family? That's great. But who is your boss? Who is your Lord? Do you know him? Are you spending time getting to know him more? And do you love him? Who is your boss? Commit to knowing God and loving him and make him the boss of your life. Now, there's a second question that we find in our text. And this is going to drive us very specifically to the issue of family. Now, I'm going to use the language for the next couple of moments here in the rest of our sermon here. I'm going to talk very specifically about parents and their relationship to their children. But the reality is, what we're talking about today can happen in all sorts of different ways. So like if you are a believer and your parents are unbelievers, what we're going to talk about can work in reverse as well. If you have siblings that you have tension with, or you want to have a healthy relationship with, or you want to lead them, these principles will apply sideways. I'm just going to use the language of parents to kids, okay? I just want to make sure that this really will be broad for everybody in the room. But the second question is this: who's the boss of your home? So the first question is, who's the boss of your life? The second question is, who's the boss of your home? I came across this quote from Edward VIII, Duke of Windsor. It's a great quote, but it's kind of a horrible quote. Look, this is what he said in 1957. He said this: "The thing that impresses me most about America is the way parents obey their children." Woo, ouch. And it was in 1957. I'm sure things have not gotten better since then, right? Parents, ask yourself this question. Are you leading your children, or are your children leading you? Who's the boss of your home, right? Who's leading whom in your home? Our text asks us this question, and it tells us how we need to lead our homes. It gives us some instruction. Again, there's not a question explicitly said here, but the instructions show the question. And the first instruction is this: to lead our home, we need to be intentional. It says this in Deuteronomy 7, at the first part of that verse. It says, "Impress them on your children." It's talking about the commandments. The previous verse is talking about God's commandments. It says, "Impress these commandments on your children." The Hebrew word that is translated impress here is a word that means to sharpen or to bring to a sharp point. It even has the idea of like a whetstone, where you would sharpen a knife with it or something. One scholar said this about this verse: "The image is that of an engraver of a monument who takes hammer and chisel in hand and with painstaking care etches a text into the face of a solid slab of granite. The sheer labor of such a task is daunting indeed, but once done, the message is there to stay." That's kind of the idea about this word impress, about an engraver going up to a stone. Now, any good engraver is going to take time to make sure that the lettering is right, that it's not crooked, that the spacing is in the right place, that you're using the right kind of chisel for the right kind of stone. There's a lot of intention that goes behind it. And you know that phrase, right? If you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? I'm fascinated, church, but I find that most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about leading their home. There are so many people that don't think about leading their children. I mean, sure, there are some parents who might think about disciplining their kids, and how they discipline their kids. But I think there are very few parents who think about character development. I mean, discipline is about, in many ways, don't do that thing. But how do you take time to think about character development and show them the things that they should do, right? And beyond that, spiritual development in the home as well. How are you leading your children spiritually in their life? I think what happens, unfortunately, is that the most well-intentioned Christian parents end up leaving it to the church, to the youth pastor, or to the children's pastor to develop their spirituality in their children. In a year, I got a couple of pictures on the screen here. In a year, the average church will have an average of about 40 hours a year to invest in children. Okay, about 40 hours, give or take. You know, some of you are more regular than others, right? 40 hours, that's the image on the left. And the image on the right is 3,000 hours that an average parent will have in an average year to minister to their kids and to invest in them. Church, we need to be intentional about our time. Look, parents, don't dismiss your influence on your children. Grandparents, don't dismiss the influence on your kids and on your grandkids. Look, I thank God for great youth workers and leaders. I thank God for Pastor Chris and Christina. I thank God for Pastor Leah. But if your only intentional act of developing your kids spiritually is bringing them to church, you are missing out. You are missing out on, and I would say you have neglected your God-given responsibility to be the spiritual leader of your home. Church, this is a major issue. You want to have a healthy family. It starts by leading your home and being intentional in it. Now, I'm grateful again that we've got opportunities to come. I love what Pastor Chris says. He says, I'm here for the assist. You're the spiritual leader. You're the pastor of your home. He's here for the assist. We're here to assist you. We want to assist you. But let's be intentional about this. Now, the way we do this, especially with all the time that parents have to invest in their kids, the way we do this is the second instruction. We need to be repetitive. The second part of verse 7 says this: talk about these commandments when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. He's not just giving 4 times. He's talking broadly. Talk about your faith. Talk about your relationship with God when you're driving your kids to school, when you're picking them up from school, when you're eating, when you're going to soccer practice, when you're putting your kids to bed. All the time, your conversation should be peppered with things that are spiritual, things that relate to your relationship with God. You know, I think the most important things in life aren't just caught, but they're taught, and that happens through repetition. In church, we need in our homes and our families, we need to make discussion about our faith natural. I was talking with somebody the other day, and I could tell that for this dad, it was very, very uncomfortable for him to talk about spiritual things. The interaction was such that he didn't even know or feel comfortable praying with his kids. And I wonder if that's more regular than not. Church, we've got to be intentional, but we've got to be repetitive. Give insight. Take time to talk with your kids about spiritual things. Answer their questions. I mean, develop that kind of relationship where your children are willing to ask you questions. I mean, if your kids aren't asking you questions, you need to stop and evaluate what kind of relationship you have with your kids. That might dig at a couple of you here. And I don't say that, you know, I don't want you to have pain, but you've got to evaluate your relationship. If your kids never ask you any questions about life, about spiritual things, what is that saying about how much you've been repeating those things in the home? How much of a value have you placed on it? Church, we are to be like spiritual tour guides, pointing things out to our children. I know that the world is crazy, and the stuff you see on the news is messed up, right? Wars and racism and politics and all of these major issues. Have you stopped to be a tour guide for your child and say, look at this here. Let me talk to you about this. Let me help you process this through your faith. This is how we see this. This is how we understand this. This is what God's word says. Incidentally, that's why we started with you knowing God and loving God. Because if you know God, then you can say, hey, look, there's something going on in the world. I want to show you what I read in the scriptures today and how it relates to that. Right? Yeah? Okay, it's really quiet in here and I just don't know what's going on. So sometimes you get really quiet and you kind of creep me out. So it's all right. We need to be spiritual tour guides. Do it over and over and over again. And when you love God, this is just natural. This is just who you are. It's not forced or faked. I think sometimes we think that our kids are going to know the real us. Well, that gets us to our third point. We need to be intentional. We need to be repetitive. And third, we need to be vulnerable. Verses 8 and 9. Tie these instructions, these commands, as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Church, we need to put ourselves out there. And the Israelites, they literally did this, and many still do. I've got some pictures on the screen of this. They would make these little boxes, and they still do, and they got these straps. You can see the straps on his arm, and if you look on his bicep, there's a box there. And on his forehead, there's another one. On the right, you can see there's little pieces of parchment in there where they write down God's commandments. They literally, it's like a billboard. Like when that person walks by, you go, that's a devout Jew. I know what he stands for. He's making himself vulnerable, right? So when you see him later and he's acting in a way that's not in line with his faith, he's putting himself out there, right? And so we as Christians, we need to do the same. Your kids, your family will learn more through your words and your outward displays than your hidden intentions in your heart. Church, we need families with open, honest, and transparent communications. And parents, your kids need to know if you're selling out to this or not. Are you willing to put a box on your forehead? Not literally, but figuratively. Are you willing to do that? Or is this just a fad? Or is your relationship with Christ just tacked on to your life? Is this something that's going to last? Church, our lives should be like a door frame for the rest of our family. What's written on our door frame? What do our kids see? Now, some of you are like, yeah, but I make mistakes. Welcome to the family, right? The other day, I blew it, and I blew up. I got angry, and I lost my temper, and I'm not proud of that, but I had my son Kent with me afterwards, and I talked with him, and I said, Kent, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have acted that way. I got angry, and it's not right. And I asked him to forgive me. And then you know what I did? I talked with him, and I said, Kent, if you see that kind of behavior in me again, I want to give you the permission to call it out. Look, I'm not trying to prop myself up as some great dad because I really blew it, all right, when I did that, when I got angry. But I'm telling you, that's the kind of thing that our kids need to see in their parents. Integrity is not about, vulnerability is not about perfection. It's about integrity. It's about being honest and authentic and real. And so the point of this isn't to say you've got to be perfect. You've got to be holier than thou. You do your best, and if you make a mistake, that's when you go and you have that conversation, if you need to have that conversation with your children. But when your children mess up, call them out. But do it with grace, right? Show them the pain that they've caused you. Show them the hurt. Help them to understand the deeper issue. But help them to see what real forgiveness is and what real love is. Vulnerability demands integrity, not perfection. And I wonder sometimes if the reasons we are not leading our homes is because we're not willing to lead our own lives first. Church, we need to live in such a way that other people identify us as a follower of Jesus, especially our families. Figuratively, they should see the box on our forehead. Figuratively, they should understand and see what's written on the door frames of our life. So what are they seeing in your life? 2 questions today. Who's your boss? Who's the Lord of your life? Are you saying, thy will be done to God? Or are you saying to God, my will be done? Who is the Lord of your life? The first way we can respond to this message today, there's a variety of ways. I'm just going to give you 2. The first way is to make Jesus the Lord or the boss of your life. Now, if you're here today and you're not a believer, you're far from God, you don't have a relationship with him today, that verse on the screen there tells us how we do that. Romans 10:13 says, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. If you believe and you declare, you call out to him, you will be saved. And if you're far from God, if you're broken, maybe you've made a lot of bad decisions and you just feel like there's no way God could accept you, the scriptures teach us that Jesus came on your behalf. He lived the life that you couldn't live. He died the death you deserved so you could experience the forgiveness that you didn't earn. And today, if you call on the name of the Lord, you will be saved. Now, there might be people in the room here today who are believers, but maybe God's not the primary boss of your life in the way that you know he needs to be. And I want to encourage you today to consider this today. We're going to take some time in a few moments to worship and to pray and to respond. If you need to reaffirm that place of making him Lord and boss of your life, I want to encourage you to do that. But second, there's another response for us today. The second is this: lead your family. Now, I use the language throughout that last section with parents with their kids, but the reality is if you're a child in the room today, or someone's child in the room today, not necessarily age-wise, but if you're someone's child, you can lead an unsaved family member or parent by being intentional, by living out your faith in intentional ways and bringing it up in conversation, by doing it repetitively, and by being vulnerable to them. So it works in other ways. How are you, as a follower of Christ, leading your family? And today, I just wanted to encourage you to take a moment to just make that commitment. God, I'm going to do a better job of leading my family. There are some dads in the room here today. You need to take serious inventory of your own spiritual life. Who's the boss of your life? And then you need to be the leader of your home. There are some moms in the room that need to do the same thing. There are some kids who need to do that for their unsaved parents. There are siblings that need to do that for another sibling. Church, we need to be people who are leading our homes. A couple verses before the passage that we've been looking at, in Deuteronomy 6 and verses 1 and 2, it talks about the commandments. And in verse 2 it says, these commandments are given so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God. You see, the purpose of all of this is to take your children who are dependent on you and help them find dependency on God. A lot of times we think of raising kids to be independent. And independent from us, but more importantly, our job as Christian parents is to lead our kids into dependence on God. And so today, how are you leading your family? Would you pray with me? God, today, I pray that you would help us, God, to make sure that you are truly the Lord and the boss of our life. Help us, God, to truly place you in that point of prominence, that place of prominence in our life where we are saying, thy will be done, not our will be done. I pray for those in the room today who don't know you, who are far from you. I pray, God, that they would call out to you today and that they would be saved, that they would respond. Lord, and I pray for those who are believers in the room today, those who maybe have neglected their responsibility to lead their families. Jesus, I pray if there's conviction, that's great, but God, may that conviction lead to action. And may our church be known as a church where families are led by godly influences, that we would be intentional about talking about the things of God, that the commandments and your word and our relationship, we'd be intentional about it. We'd be repetitive, God, and in so doing, we'd be vulnerable and real and authentic. God, I pray that you would use us to make a difference, to raise up a generation that is dependent on you. Help us, we pray, in Jesus' name.